I would invite people to join me in being outraged every day and not just on the days where a shooting hits headlines.
Hello, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Nora Kenworthy.
And Marcus Harrison Green.
Marcus, when we asked life, could things get any worse? I think we thought that was going to be a rhetorical question, but unfortunately, life said, hold my beer.
It certainly did, Nora. We started the week with more man-made plagues of gun violence from Brown University to Australia,
Hmm.
where, Australia, they have a mass shooting about once every 30 years. We have one roughly every 24 hours.
Jesus.
And I am not exaggerating, unfortunately. Go look at the data. And then, at least here in Washington State, came the biblical plagues of floods and torrential rainfall. And then we wrapped it all up with the orange plague as Donald Trump attempted to break the world record for lives per minute in his very own bah humbug primetime address to the nation.
I definitely think that speech had the vibe of a guy who's mad because he wants Christmas to be more about himself than it is about Jesus. But it definitely had like seasonal affective disorder TED Talk vibes, just with more racism and bad lighting.
Oh my God. Yeah. Isn't that every Oval Office address at these days? Um, I gotta say, like, the thing though that was just so exhausting about it, and I sat through the whole freaking thing,
Oh God, I'm
is
sorry.
yeah, man, I'm a masochist. I'm a masochist. But it wasn't even just the lies, nor it was like the quantity. It's like being waterboarded with nonsense.
Yes. And in addition to the fire hose of like absolute departure from reality, the administration is also moving to end or functionally strangle this week gender related care from minors by threatening both federal funding to hospitals and threatening the doctors that provide it.
Yeah, which I mean, God, it's a quick reminder of the state just saying, look, we don't recognize you, and then we're gonna punish healthcare systems for recognizing you.
Yes. And we also want you to suffer.
Yes, that is
um,
the cruelty
yeah,
is absolutely the
is the
point.
point. Yes. I mean, if you're listening and you're trans or you are a friend or loved one of someone who is, I mean, first of all, we just want to say that we see you. Um, and we're never going to treat your existence or your right to healthcare as negotiable. Also, call your senators, folks, because this is one that can still be stopped. Unlike that Vanity Fair piece, by the way.
Oh my God, yes, yes, that was quite a Schadenfreude, shall we say? Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, being I guess she said she didn't know she was on the record or something, but anyway,
I mean,
uh, I gotta say that like just going back quickly to trans medical care, uh, all of this is happening in a culture where the same people who are screaming parental rights suddenly don't want parents making decisions with doctors about their kids.
mhm. Yeah, they want parental rights, like, they want free speech and liberty, that is to say, selective, conditional, and mostly for people they agree with.
Oh God, yes. Well, going back quickly to that Vanity Fair piece.
Oh, good, I'm glad we're getting there.
So Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, described him in the piece as having an alcoholic's personality.
Which, I think all of us have probably, unfortunately, encountered an alcoholic's personality before, but, like, this lines up. It's extreme denial, revisionist history, insisting everything is actually going great, that nothing is actually your fault, when the room is very much on fire, all of which was very present in that speech that we got, from the Oval Office
Yeah,
recently.
it was overly so, I'd say.
Yes.
I do want to say on this podcast, we do appreciate Susie for confirming on the record what millions of Americans have been forced to witness with their own eyes for nearly a decade.
And speaking of acknowledgments, I do want us to take a moment to acknowledge the 2 plus shootings that occurred this week. One at Australia's Bondi Beach during a Hanukkah service where a man and his son opened fire, killing 15 people. Another at Brown University where a shooting killed 2 students and left several others injured.
Yeah, and I gotta also acknowledge, you had Australia. who had one mass shooting collectively lost its mind in a productive way and said absolutely not, never again. It should be mentioned that, as I brought up before, I wasn't being facetious when I said Australia has one mass shooting every 30 years. Like it literally the last mass shooting occurred, or I want to say technically 27 years ago. But what they did in the response of that was not, just throw out some thoughts and prayers here. They literally they collectively, all sides of the aisle were like, we do not want this to happen again. They passed legislation, and that is one of the reasons why, quite frankly, the mass shoot as bad as the mass shooting was, and I don't want to trivialize the fact that 15 people lost their lives, but it probably could have been 150, right? We had,
Mhm.
the restrictions on certain guns not been in place as it is now, and I am so glad to hear that they are going to also now do some farther restrictions of guns in the wake of this most recent shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, isn't it remarkable just to see what actual legislation to address a problem can look like? I mean, in the US, it's striking because we have mass shootings and then we have a spike in gun sales every time. Um, I mean, I it's just like they looked at the tragedy and they were like, "Okay, we've seen enough data for several lifetimes. Let's go ahead and fix this."
Right. I mean, here you will have, in this country, you'll have mass shootings at the schools, right? And the response will be, "Oh, that was truly shocking." Should we maybe the response is to give teachers grenades and arm them up to ensure that this never happens again. And it just it's the saying, right? I mean, stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and respecting a different result. And that is essentially that describes in fine detail the gun policies here in the United States over the past, I would say, half century.
Exactly. Yeah. I do think that there's an antidote to the feeling of hopelessness though. And that is that things are moving in places around the US, not always nationally, but in certain places, a lot has actually been done. And sometimes it's easy for us to forget that progress is being made when it moves, at the pace of glaciers.
That might be giving it too much credit at times. No,
Yeah,
that being,
especially in an age of climate
yeah,
change. Yeah.
yes. But I will say, that I think that's why in discussing what we were going to do this week, um, for our listeners, I think that's why, quite frankly, it was important that we felt we should re-air a conversation that we had earlier this year with Renee Hopkins, the executive director of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Renee walked us through concrete, evidence-based solutions that are being implemented in communities across the US and actually showing true, genuine results.
Renee Hopkins is the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility in Washington state. In her 6 years as CEO, she has led the organization to become the leading state based gun violence prevention organization in the country, passing 3 ballot initiatives, electing a gun violence prevention majority in the state legislature, working with systems partners to develop best practice models for implementing gun laws, and passing state laws that put Washington state at the forefront of suicide prevention and domestic violence laws as they relate to firearms. Renee also serves on multiple boards working towards safe and healthy communities that embrace prevention, restorative justice, and criminal justice reform. We couldn't be more excited to have her with us today.
Renee, thank you so much again for being with us today. As I told Nora earlier, these conversations are sort of never not topical, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so, I want to ask you, you've lived through the devastation of gun violence personally. You lost your brother in a school shooting nearly 30 years ago. How does that lived experience just continue to shape the urgency and approach you bring to this work every day?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus, for that question. I think I was definitely shaped by the loss of my brother, who was 14 years old at the time and was killed in his algebra class in Moses Lake, Washington in 1996. So this was before school shootings were really a thing, before Columbine. And it definitely obviously rocked my family to its core, but it also rocked a community to its core. And I think, for those of you who don't know about Moses Lake, Washington, it's in one of the most conservative parts of the state. Majority gun owners, my family included. I grew up in a hunting household where everyone thought that we were safe in how we dealt with guns. I think another incident that impacted me, not personally as much as my brother's death did, but in terms of how I look at this work, is that 8 months later, my cousin, who was also a teenager and very close to my brother, in what we think was going to just be a suicide attempt, killed himself and his mother and his 9-year-old sister with a hunting rifle in the home. And I think for me now, many, many years later, at the time, I wasn't thinking like this, but many years later, it really struck home for me that the line between a perpetrator of gun violence and a victim of gun violence is so fine, so fine it's almost not there. And that's true with my family's story, but that's true in so many incidents. And I think that really helped shape not only how I think about gun violence and how we approach it, but also in my understanding that people who perpetrate gun violence, especially young people, are often as much victims as the people that they kill or hurt. And that's very true in my case. I think of the boy who killed my brother, who was also a teenager at the time, and his life was over then too. And he's in jail for the rest of his life. My sisters and I actually advocated for him not to be in jail for the rest of his life. He was a young boy who had lived in a really traumatic household and had easy access to firearms. And that impact was devastating, but he lost too, and his life was lost too. So I think for me, coming to this space, it's not just about the people who are directly impacted, meaning the people who are shot, but it's about their families, it's about their communities, and understanding the ripple effect. I don't believe my cousin would have done what he did had Arnie not been killed. And while I can never prove that one way or another, it's something that I believe. And I think we see that in communities. Violence begets violence, and hurt people hurt people. And so I think I come to this work with a holistic sort of look at it and understanding that, for the example with my brother, the only way for my brother to have been saved was for Barry, his shooter, to have been saved. And that didn't happen.
Yeah. I think you join a very large group of people who have experienced gun violence in their own lives and become advocates. And one of the things I was thinking about in the kind of run up to this conversation was just how many of us have been impacted by mass shootings and gun violence, and how many of us have been traumatized by it, either as victims or onlookers. I grew up in the town next to Columbine. It shaped so much of my young experience. Now I teach on a campus where we have to go through drills, and I send a kid to a public school where they do drill. It's all of us, right? How do we start to address some of that trauma and what you're calling the sort of people hurt by these acts of violence, and kind of break some of that cycle, not just in Minnesota, but all across the country where we're experiencing it?
I think it's a really good question. I think I'd kind of like to address it in two different ways. One, I think putting in perspective just how common school shootings are or are not, and understanding the place that they play in the overall sort of gun violence epidemic that we have going on in our country. And Well, I don't want this to minimize. I mean, I lost a brother in a school shooting, so I don't want it to minimize at all the impact that it has, both directly and indirectly, just on the sort of psyche of our children and our country in general.
Mm-hmm.
But school shootings and mass shootings really only represent between 1% and 2% of the overall death caused by firearms in our country every year. That doesn't mean that it's not scary to go to school. It doesn't, again, I don't want to minimize anything, but I think putting that in perspective is really important. But we should be outraged every single day. Gun violence is the leading cause of death of children and pregnant women in our country. It has been now for a number of years. That means we lose between 8 and 9 kids every single day to preventable gun violence in our country. And I have started to find myself getting more outraged when the outrage comes only if it's in a particular place, like a school or a church, or with a particular population of the people. I'm just going to name it. We get really outraged when white kids are killed.
Yep.
And we don't get as outraged when Black and brown kids whose lives are just as valuable are killed every single day. We also didn't get outraged by the fact that suicide by children is about 37% of the total sort of violence against children and death caused by guns in our country. And so I want to address some of the things about school shootings in particular, but I also just think it's really important to remember that context. And I would invite people to join me in being outraged every day, and not just on the days where a shooting hits headlines.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder.
But back to the school shooting issue, which clearly is an issue in our country. There are some things that we know about school shootings, and that is that most people who are shooters in schools, they almost always exhibit advanced warning signs. They typically are getting firearms from their own homes or close family or friends. And that if we take gun violence sort of out of the school itself, but in the surrounding area, that school gun violence does have disproportionate impact on students of color. And in fact, 2 and 3 incidents of gunfire on school grounds are in schools where one or more racial and or ethnic minorities make up the majority of the student population. So I think there are some things within that we can really look to. One is, which you'll probably hear me say many times during this conversation, safe storage is so important. So people who choose to own guns, if they safely store them, it can be a huge preventative measure in stopping school shootings. I also think it's really important, and this is more important, this is a message for the adults, even though the children are often the ones who might hear something. But if you hear something, say something. And it's really important to raise those flags because these things are preventable. And because these young people, and typically it is young people who are doing the school shootings, do show signs, there are opportunities for intervention and prevention. And I think that's really, really important. And I think it's important that we tell kids to, if they see something, say something too. But I also want to just, this is an adult responsibility. And the less we have to put on our kids in terms of taking responsibility for this epidemic, the better, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. You talked about sort of, the need for more of us to be outraged every day. And I want to say what I'm consistently outraged about, and I know a lot of other people are, whether they are parents, students, or community members, that any time a shooting happens, it always gets met with this outpouring of sort of thoughts and prayers in terms of in terms of the sentiment from lawmakers. But it often seems that people don't know how to, truly best direct their anger into action. There's always there's always this pervasive trend of GoFundMe campaigns, in the wake of shootings within communities. And so I'm wondering, your work does lead communities into taking more direct action. Mm-hmm. So if possible, could you just walk us through how you want to see families and communities just turning rage and metabolizing that into action at moments like these.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Marcus. And maybe I can start by telling just a little bit of the story of Washington State and what we've done here. Post the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, there were a group of civic leaders, philanthropists, elected officials who came together and really just said, we have to do something. And they recognized that the likelihood of an action at the federal level was very, very high. And so they decided very smartly, and this was before my time with the Alliance, but to take local action. And I want to circle back to this at the end of this, of answering this, because I think it's even more important today to be thinking about local action and what that can look like. When my organization was founded, Washington State's halls of power were controlled by the gun lobby. The gun lobby actually spent more money on races in Washington State than they did on California and Texas combined. And that is not per capita, that is actual dollars. Our state legislators were captured by the gun lobby, Republican and Democrat. In fact, at the opening meeting or sort of convening that was pulled together by the founder of our organization, Democratic leadership basically told him and the other people there that nothing was going to happen in the legislature, basically told them to pound sand. And, they in their, I think, brilliance, took that as a challenge and started our organization, which really started as an initiative. And I think, again, this is really important given sort of where we find ourselves today. The power still is with the people, and individual people and individual voters have so much power to change things. And in our state, we're lucky to have the initiative process where you can actually take an issue like gun violence prevention to the people for direct vote. And what we know about gun violence and how people view gun violence and gun violence prevention initiatives is that the vast majority of Americans, including the majority of gun owners and the majority of Republicans and the majority of independents, are for responsible gun laws. And it's indisputable. I mean, these surveys have been done year after year after year. And in fact, the support of individual policies grows and grows. And so in Washington State, we did just that. We took it to the people and we passed our first gun violence prevention measure, which was a background check initiative, at the ballot with 60% of the vote. And again, you don't get to 60% with just Democrats. And we thought at that point that, and I joined the Alliance just after that, that would be enough evidence to really change the hearts and minds of our electeds. We've proven the hearts and minds of voters are in this direction. And so we thought it would do the same with our electeds. And we were wrong. It took another 2 years of immense lobbying, advocacy, organizing people from across the state to be in direct connection with their elected leaders, as well as direct lobbying from our organization. And we moved some small things through the legislature that weren't really seen as gun violence laws. But we had to go back to the ballot again. And we did that with extreme risk protection orders in 2016. And again, the people spoke. And this initiative passed in every legislative district except for one with the majority. And it also had nearly 70% of the total statewide vote. So again, the people are speaking. I think our politicians want us to think that this is a divisive issue. It's only divisive for them. And it's only divisive for them because of where they're getting money. I'm just going to be blunt. With the people, it's not divisive. Sure, you have people on the extremes of each side of the issue, but for the general population, people are in agreement. So
yeah,
oh, sorry, Marcus.
No, I was just going to say, I so wish that there was an ability to have a national referendum voted on, right? I mean, because so often you see these polls, right, where this is an issue that does truly cut across, ideological lines, where, majorities of, both Republicans and Democrats even, have definitely, view that there needs to be some, form of gun control. Now, the details can get squishy, but yeah, I mean, to your point, this isn't an issue where the folks are fervently like no gun control at all. I don't think there's even a plurality in this country who would be anti, some form of gun violence prevention.
There isn't, but I think that that's where the opportunity exists. And, just a little bit more about Washington State. We didn't just take it to the people in terms of initiatives. We also ran campaigns to elect gun violence prevention champions. And again, using the power of the people to vote for how they stand on gun violence. We were able, over the course of about 4 years, to flip the Senate to be majority gun violence prevention. Now, it varies by individual about how far they were willing to go on policy. But within the last now 13 years, we've endorsed and helped elect nearly 500 candidates up and down the ballot. About 6 years ago, we started doing as far down as school board races. And this year, we even did some parks commissioner races, really understanding that local is where it's at. And we have now a supermajority of gun violence prevention champions in Washington State. And we have, again, since our inception, now passed more than 60 laws, and only 4 of those were by initiative. And the one initiative that the fourth one is there was actually a police accountability initiative. Our organization was one of the first organizations that was really in the GVP movement space, was willing to step in and declare that we see police violence as part of gun violence, and that we have to have a holistic approach to that. So we also helped campaign on Initiative 940 in Washington State while we were running Initiative 1639. And it was a great partnership, and we continue in our organization to work on police accountability and reform in the legislature as well.
That's amazing. And I think it's fair to say probably that part of what you would attribute your success to is that the Alliance's work really looks at how gun violence intersects with suicide, domestic violence, racism, other systemic harms. How do you want the public to be thinking about gun violence? I'm going to put on my public health expert hat here, but how do you want people to think about gun violence as a public health crisis connected to these broader systemic inequities and social issues?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is probably true in many movements, but definitely in the gun violence prevention movement, is that people tend to really sort of want to bifurcate the different kinds of gun violence. And while there are, specific policy responses to certain kinds of gun violence, as an organization, we really don't look at it like that. We look at it as a whole and understand that, as an example, the connection between domestic violence and mass shootings is huge. The connection between youth being impacted by domestic violence in their homes and then going on to perpetrate gun violence is huge. And so seeing all of these interconnected, I think that the line between a homicidal and a suicidal young person is very, very thin, and could really go either way depending on the moment for a young person. So for us, the intersections are really important. We definitely take a public health approach to the way that we develop policy. We really learn from what's happening on the ground, what's working and what's not working. And we go back to the legislature to tweak the laws to make sure that they're really having the intent that we wanted them to. We also have a very strong equity lens that we take to all aspects of our work, policy development, the implementation work that we do, as well as our political work and our endorsement processes. And we think that taking an intersectional approach to the work is part of what makes us a strong organization like we are. That doesn't weaken us, it strengthens us. But I will be honest with you, in the movement, when I started in this space, the acknowledgement of community-based solutions was basically non-existent. I'm happy to say that has changed over the last decade. And I think we're more and more understanding and seeing that community-based solutions are a huge part of the answer. It's not just about the laws that we pass. It's about supporting people who are closest to the violence, doing the work in their communities. And part of what I see our role in that space is making sure that we're advocating that people are paid for the work that they're doing and are acknowledged for the work that they're doing. And again, we're seeing more and more of that. But when I started in this work, we had 0 state dollars going to dedicated gun violence prevention programs. We have now advocated at the local, state level, I won't put federal in that, but for tens of millions of dollars to be invested in local community-based solutions. And we're just scratching the surface. We need to do so much more. So, I think we really approach this with a lens of both public safety and public health, and seeing it through both of those and even how they intersect with each other has been part of what I think has made us successful in Washington State. But we wouldn't have been able to do any of that without, again, people. It is the power of the people. And I think what we offer is making it easy and accessible for people to access their elected leaders and to make sure that their voices are heard. And sometimes even to understand that they have a voice to share, because I don't think that everyone assumes that they do. Whether they are directly impacted or indirectly impacted. I mean, I think at this point in our country, there's no one that is not impacted. And for people who think that they aren't, they're just not digging deep enough, because all of us are.
Right. No, well said. Well, speaking of elected leaders, if you believe certain ones, violence seems to only happen in primarily Black communities like DC or Chicago. That's certainly being used as an excuse for excessive policing and unwarranted disruptions by the National Guard and other government overreach. And so I want to ask you, just how have you found yourself sort of responding to that discourse, and how can we help Americans refocus on policies or other interventions that, some of which you already mentioned, that most effectively protect our communities and children and families from everyday gun violence?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, Marcus. It's an overwhelming question because I think we don't have a lot of control right now over what's happening at the federal level. That just is what it is. And that can feel very disempowering. Personally, it can make me feel overwhelmed and full of dread. And I want to be clear, this president is not for public safety. He never has been. He is using the tools that, whether he legally has them or not, as a distraction, and a distraction that further harms certain populations in our communities. And when I say certain populations, I mean Black and brown people.
That's interesting, Renee. I had noticed that too recently. Yeah.
Had you noticed that? Obvious. But this is where I think I go back to the opportunities in front of us right now. While I can get in a place of feeling completely hopeless and full of dread, I know that we can still be doing things at our local and state level, and not just in Washington, across the country, that while we're also helping to fight what's happening at the federal level, we are doing things that are saving lives now. We're not waiting. For goodness sake, we've been waiting for, if we take Sandy Hook as the mark, for almost a decade and a half for real federal action. We got a little bit with Biden with the powers that he had, but we've essentially seen next to nothing. Let's just be honest. And Meanwhile, state by state, we can do things and we can save lives. And we know this. And in the process of doing that, if we're organizing not just grassroots, but grass tops, and organizing to elect the right people, organizing to pass initiatives, organizing to demand funding at the local level, state level, and federal level, we can be doing things that are saving lives while creating the mass swell that we will eventually need to have real action at the federal level. And so I'm trying very hard day by day to really look at the opportunity in front of us. And, I'll be honest, like a lot of our national organizations who do great work, they've been so focused at the federal level, and they have not worked at really mobilizing state by state to be pushing things forward that we know save lives, while electing people that we know will continue to do those things, and growing movements. And if you look historically at many of the social movements, well, all the social movements in American history, they start local and they build up. And we have the opportunity to do that with the gun violence space right now. And that's a place where our organization is really leaning in. We are now partnering with 3 other states. And, the national model is really, and again, it's been helpful. So I'm not trying to disparage our national partners, but it really has been about investing in a lobbyist to help lobby in a state for a law. It's not about building a movement. It's not about building a movement state by state with lasting infrastructure. Most state-based organizations in the GVP movement are run by volunteers, mostly women, often women of color, and survivors. The majority of them have budgets of under $250,000 a year. They only have a C3 charitable side. They do not have lobbying or political tools at their feet. And it is just grossly underfunded. And that's a place where we're really leaning in right now and looking to see how can we help states, not that we helicopter in and do what we want, but how are we helping them organically build out their own state-based infrastructure to be doing the things that we've done in Washington and other states have done, understanding that that will eventually trickle up, if you will, to the federal level.
So you're saying that if our listeners feel outraged right now, they could give a very meaningful donation to some of these state level orgs and make some progress and have a big impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, we're really trying to take the states that we're investing in right now, have a lot of the tools that we have in Washington state to really we're trying to get as much done as quickly as we can.
Yep.
So they have initiative structures, et cetera. But even in red states, there are things you can do. And there are ways to find, broad support for domestic violence laws that have huge intersection with gun violence laws, as an example. I'm not feeling optimistic overall about our country right now. I do think that there's huge opportunity in this space. And I believe that the more of us that lean in here, the more lives that will be saved along the way.
Yeah. Well, and I will also say that real grassroots approach, it changes not just the policy, it also changes the culture in a state of how people think about guns and what sorts of conversations they have. As a parent, I don't think this is just a Seattle thing. I think it's a Washington State thing. But as a parent, it's pretty normal for me to have a conversation with my pediatrician about whether we have guns in the house, or to have another parent, whose kid is coming over to the house say, hey, do you have guns in the house? Right? It's become so much more normal to have those conversations. And that's really powerful.
It is. And I think acknowledging that those are hard conversations. I don't think I work in this space. I'm a survivor. And the first time I had that conversation with a new friend that my daughter was going over to, I was scared.
Yeah.
It was nerve-wracking, but it ended up being fine, and it gets easier over time.
Totally. Yeah. So I've been sort of dying to ask an expert this question for a while, and it is sort of about changing norms and customs. And that is this real kind of trend, I think, that we're seeing of liberal and or kind of marginalized people who once supported stricter gun laws now actually sort of going out and buying guns because of concerns about political violence or lack of governmental protections for their rights. Like, I'm thinking that I have a number of trans friends who, in the last couple of years, I've known them to purchase guns. And so what do you say to people who are expressing such concerns or sort of intentions to you? And like, how do you think about that as someone who's an expert in this space?
I have a lot of thoughts about it, but the most important thing for me, individually, and how I lead our organization is to meet people with empathy and not judgment. I think, well, I know factually that owning a gun does not make you safer, and that is unrefuted. That doesn't mean that it can't make people feel safer. And I think it's really important, and especially for those of us progressive left-leaning folks, to not come into this with judgment, but to come into it with an open sort of heart of empathy, of understanding that, okay, there's a reason that this individual or this group of individuals feel the need for this. And while I wish that no one would purchase guns, again, I think it's really important to come to it with a sense of empathy. That being said, I think as an organization, the Alliance definitely takes this very seriously. I think back to your question around public health, I think our public health entities need to take this very seriously, that it is upon us to make sure that we're doing as much public education as we can about the true risks of firearm ownership. And for people, just for a little bit of context, owning a firearm makes you at more risk, and people in your household at more risk of homicide, suicide, domestic violence, and unintentional death or injury from firearm. And those, again, are those stats go back decades and continue to hold true today. So I think it's important to be doing as much public education as we can, but within that public education, also to be talking about how you can mitigate that risk, because there are real ways that you can mitigate the risk if you do choose to own a firearm. And that includes safe storage as probably the very top of the list there. And I'm happy to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in safe storage in our state with work that we've been doing in that space. But it also includes making sure that people understand the tools through laws that exist. And in this regard, I'm thinking of extreme risk protection orders, which really allow family or law enforcement to, with due process, to temporarily remove firearms and the ability to purchase firearms from an individual who is presenting risk of harm to themselves or others. In Washington State, we have a really robust protection order, which are all civil proceedings. Sort of structure that include 5 others, including domestic violence protection orders, sexual assault protection orders, et cetera. But all of those civil proceedings allow for the removal of and the taking away of the ability to possess or purchase a firearm for individuals who, again, are demonstrating extreme risk in some way, shape, or form. And we know that these tools save lives. So again, I think it's upon us and our public health officials to make sure that we're getting accurate information into the public's hands, and that we are doing everything we can to continue to pass laws that give people tools to intervene in situations where people are at great risk for harming themselves or others. Did that answer your question?
Oh my gosh, yes. This is like classic harm reduction approach. I love it.
It is harm reduction. It absolutely is harm reduction, yes.
Well, Renée, like I want to ask you, because I know, as a member of the media, I think we're oftentimes guilty of not focusing more on the successes that organizations have had, such as the Alliance. And you already talked about the extreme risk protection orders and background checks and so forth that we were able to establish here in Washington. Another one of those is raising the age for purchasing assault-style weapons here in the state. And so I want to ask you, what lessons can folks from, grassroots organizations from across the country learn from what we have done here and continue to do here? And what things do you feel, in your opinion, still need some improvement in terms of, where we may or may not be falling short?
That's a good question, Marcus. And I will just add that we've not only raised the age, now you cannot purchase an assault style rifle in Washington state at all. So we've even taken it a step further.
Right. There goes Nora's Christmas gift to me, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No.
We've taken a very deliberative approach to policy making in Washington state, and have really, we just passed this year a permit to purchase law that actually, as the research that we have available to date, is the most, it's the law that has the most impact on all kinds of gun violence, including gun trafficking, of all of the laws that exist in the country. But that took us 10 years. And we were very deliberative in terms of how we got there. We didn't just start with a full permit to purchase policy. We built the pieces that we knew were going to be needed to actually pass and then enact the law that we did this year. And so I would really encourage other states, and we're doing this with the 3 other states that we're working with now in Oregon, Michigan, and Maine, to really look at policy building. When I say iterative, I don't mean slow, I mean intentional. But understanding that, passing a law that is really focused on preventing suicide that might feel like not a very big deal can build to things that are very big deals. And that finding ways within whatever your political structure is, to meet people where there is consensus. And there's a lot of consensus across the aisles. There was an hour chambers here in Washington state, and this is true across the country. There's a lot of consensus around things like suicide prevention, things like mental health for kids, things like reducing the ability for abusers to have easy access to firearms. And so finding those places where you can start building. And while you're building, recognizing that if you're organizing, I can't say that enough, and organizing grassroots, organizing organizations that may seem to not be working in the same issue space as you are, but has some overlap, some intersection. I mean, I think we have like 500 organizations that are coalition members of ours to date. And, we've been able to have tens of thousands of volunteers across the state in one way, shape, or form, whether that be signing petitions, reaching out to their elected officials, and really having their voices heard. We know that change can happen. Again, when Washington State, when we started this work, we were told that it was an absolute no-go. And a decade and a half later, here we are. And I think, one thing that we haven't talked a lot about here, but I want to make sure we do, so if I can take the liberty of interjecting, that while we talk a lot about voting and passing laws and electing the right people, et cetera, once laws are passed, the work really begins, because laws are not worth anything unless they're implemented. And implementation is often uber local, depending on the law. So understanding, and again, as an organization, the Alliance takes this very seriously, that once we pass a law, it's still up to us to hold our lawmakers accountable to make sure that the laws are funded and that implementation is happening. And that means you're working with on-the-ground advocates, on-the-ground community violence interruption organizations and intervention organizations, that you're working within the criminal legal system, so that all parties are doing their parts to implement. And again, coming at it which I learned early on with the work with the Alliance, we passed domestic violence protection order law that required the removal of firearms in 2014. And when I started this work in 2015, I did sort of a state tour, talking to folks that were responsible for the implementation of that law, including law enforcement, prosecutors, et cetera. And it just wasn't being implemented. But it wasn't being implemented because people were just against the law. People didn't understand their roles in implementing it. And so again, coming at this with a bit of humility and understanding that, you know, most people are doing their jobs because they want to see good things happen in the world, and meeting them where they're at and helping them get to where they need to be to make sure that the laws are implemented effectively is really vitally important to actually saving lives. I'm off my soapbox now.
No, I just got to underscore because I know there are a lot of activists and community organizers who listen to our podcast, and like just thank you for demonstrating that long-term strategy is also possible on the left as well as other places. Anyway, yes.
No, I was going to say very much the same thing, that like gun violence prevention can feel like such a relentless, awful, intractable issue, and especially after tragedies like the one last week. And you've laid out for us how this like incremental, really dedicated strategy at a state and local level has made enormous change over time. And I really didn't expect to come into this conversation and have a hopeful story today, even though I've lived these policy changes in our state. And so thank you for that reminder. It's really wonderful.
No, absolutely. And, you know, and I think in all fairness, our organization has had to grow a lot along the way too, and has had to learn a lot of things. This issue space has been led predominantly by white people. I'm talking the mainstream. I'm not talking about people on the ground actually doing a lot of the work, but in the policy arena. And we've had to learn a lot and have really intentionally grown our own coalition and our own advocacy power to be advocating not just for laws, but for more and more funding into community-based solutions. And really, you know, a lot of listening as to what is needed by those on the ground doing the work day in, day out, who, again, you know, don't have a C4 arm necessarily that they can hire a lobbyist to be lobbying for their efforts in Olympia or in DC. And, you know, I'm so thankful for our community partners who have been willing to work with us and let us follow and learn from them, and hopefully, you know, help impact what then is happening for them in terms of funding, which, you know, Washington State was one of the first states to actually set up a state level Office of Firearm. Oh, the name is awful. Office of Firearm Safety and Violence Prevention. But
how
its
that's
main
not on
goal,
the tip of your tongue, Renee.
it's terrible. I know, it's terrible. But, you know, that was the first state office whose intent, like the stated goal was to be investing in community violence intervention interruption programs on the ground. And we don't have nearly enough money going into that state office yet. We've been able to increase it year after year. But I think that's another place where people's voices are so important, is not just in passing the laws, but advocating for the funding of programs that we know are having an impact on the ground in the communities that are being disproportionately impacted by gun violence. And you can do that at the state level and local level, city council, county council, up and down the ticket, if you will.
Yeah. I'm going to ask one last question that puts you on the spot. And so feel free to tell me if you like need a moment or something. And I'm sorry, I didn't give you preparation for this at first, but in this conversation, you've given us like so many wonderful nuggets of like very concrete things that people can do. And so the next time one of us or one of our listeners is feeling super outraged about this issue, what are sort of like the top things that you want us to consider doing that are like things that we could do right now or in this moment or this month that would move the needle a bit?
I'm going to be a little woo here. I think one, I just want people to believe that this is preventable and that we don't have to live like this. And I can share some action steps with you, but I think that's the most important thing, is just an absolute belief, which I have it to the core of me, that we don't have to live like this, and that the things that we do as individuals, the things that organizations like mine do, really do make a difference and really do and can save lives. So I guess that would be my biggest challenge for people, is just, question where your gut is. And if it's not that you think this is preventable, challenge yourself to hopefully get to where you can believe that it's preventable and that we don't have to live like this and our children don't have to live like this. In terms of actionable steps, vote. And I don't care how you vote, but vote your conscience in terms of gun violence prevention, and make sure that you know that where the people that you're voting for stand on this issue. Again, it's the number one killer of kids and pregnant women in our country. This should be an issue that people vote on. Number two, contact your elected officials. And again, your city council members, your county council members, your state legislators, and your Congress people and senators at the federal level. And don't just contact them once, be relentless. Send them an email once a week. They literally count the emails that they get. I am not kidding. They count their emails, and they count how much they get from people who are on one side of the issue compared to what they get from people on the other side of the issue. It matters. Connect with local groups that are doing different actions at different times of the year. We're getting ready for a really major election coming up. I mean, we have a major, all of them are major. We have a big one coming up in just, a month and a half, 2 months. But in 2026, we have a really big election coming up. And take the time to get to know who's running, and make sure that you're voting in a way that aligns with your morals and including gun violence in that. And then always, donations are always great. And I would say, when you think about donating, think about those organizations that are closest to the community that you live in. I mean, I'm not even asking for money for the Alliance in particular here. I mean, really look at what organizations are making change in the communities where you live, and donate. I mean, and know that your money, whether it be $5 or $5 million, matters. I mean, our organization, our median giver gives about $15 a year. So while we are lucky to have a lot of donors that give a lot more than that, the small donations matter, and they matter as much, if not more, than the large donations. So those are some concrete things that I can think of. But more than anything, I just I yearn for a time when people really believe that we can do something about this, because I know that we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And may it be so, as my Unitarian friends say.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Renee, just thank you is not enough for your time today, but as you know, I'm a journalist who is underpaid, so that's all I have. But seriously, thank you very much. Along with my $15 a month, I think I give slightly more, as I am also a board member of the Alliance, and I will. You said that you couldn't say give to the Alliance, but I can certainly say give to the Alliance. It is tremendous organization, and I'm extremely fortunate to be a part of it as well. So,
Thank you, Marcus. I really appreciate that. Can I say one more thing before we get off?
Yes,
sorry, here I am taking editorial. Sorry.
No, go for it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think the other thing that could hopefully provide hope for people is that, within a decade now in Washington State, we are starting to see real change. We've seen reduction in suicide. We're starting to see reduction in homicide. We've seen a huge decrease in the purchase of firearms by 70% in the last year. We've also seen a huge increase in the utilization of safe storage by 30% in the last year. So we are seeing things change. So it's not just about the things that we've done on the back end. We're actually starting to see their impact now.
That's so amazing.
And Renee, I do want to ask you this, and this I not asking your opinion on this at all, but just factually and so forth.
Yes.
Did that happen without, like, I don't know, just a major expansion of the police budgets? Is that correct?
Did what happen with without a major expansion of police budgets? Yes,
Yeah.
Marcus. Yes.
Oh.
This is not
Well, interesting.
I think which I can say this, I think it's important to understand that police normally are responding to something that has actually happened and already happened. Not that there aren't certain situations where police can prevent things, but in general, they're reactionary. And the work we are doing is preventative. And I think, well, we need both. This change is not because of an increase in law enforcement.
All right. Well, from your mouth to the goddess Athena's ears, I suppose.
There we go. There we go.
Renee, seriously, thank you so very much. A huge fan of you, a huge fan of the work that you're doing, and thank you for stopping by the podcast.
Well, back at you, and hopefully I didn't ramble too much.
No.
Appreciate you both.
Thank you.
Again, Nora, like this is obviously the second time that we've, provided this interview with Renee to our listeners. And again, I mean, it is still so resonant in so many ways. And I will say this, that if listeners are able, please do consider supporting the Alliance for Gun Responsibility's work. They are one of the organizations that are actually making a measurable impact in reducing gun violence. And it is towards the end of the year, so folks are, for nothing else but a tax break, please do consider giving to them. They are a 501c3 organization.
Yes, please give to them and other organizations doing this work rather than just guilt donating to GoFundMe campaigns in the wake of gun violence, please. And I will also say, I think this is a conversation that has really lived in my head since we first had it. And unfortunately, we have had many gun violence incidents since then. And every time one comes up, there's a part of my head that returns to this conversation and thinks, it is not all hopeless. Good people are doing good things. They are taking necessary steps. And there are things that are being done to make our community safer. And I find that to be a really reassuring thing. And I hope it is reassuring to our listeners to hear this again, because I think it needs to be said over and over again.
Yes, yes. And I will just say, please share this conversation if you have not already, with folks who need it. And everybody needs this conversation. So please share it widely. Um, well, Nora, with that being said, want to quickly do our 8 ounces of joy as, this, we should let listeners know that we're going to go on a bit of a holiday break over the next couple of weeks. You'll still get episodes of In the Meanwhile. We'll just be re-airing some older conversations that we've had that are still very resonant, I might add. But Nora and I are going to hibernate a little bit for the holiday.
Yeah, try and dry ourselves out from all the rain that we're getting here.
Exactly.
Marcus, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think that the 8 ounces of joy I had today, I was listening to a historian talk not too long ago. I forget the gentleman's name, but he hosts the podcast called Past Lives, which is a history podcast, and he was talking about how, honestly, like, he was reflecting back on the end, towards the end of the year, and he said, I l- I know how this might not be the most warming thought in terms of, where we are right now, but he was like, I, at the beginning of the year, I was thinking about how bad things could potentially be for us, right? That we could potentially have, cities under siege via, the federal government and sending troops and National Guards and so forth for, for an extended amount of time, and just rampant violence, that's state sanctioned. And like, I am not at all saying that where we are right now is ideal, because it is not, but
Yeah.
I truly do think it could have been so much worse than even, where we are now. Like, I mean, I do think you are seeing people who, after a time of great compliance from institutions and elected officials, who quite frankly just stopped doing their job and was just, constantly capitulating towards the president. I think you have seen people finally stand up a bit, and you're seeing folks say no, right? And you're seeing
Mhm.
other folks not willing to just quote unquote write a blank check, to this president to do anything. And so I guess I'm hopeful, and I guess it's a strange thing to be hopeful about, that things weren't as things weren't as bad as they possibly could have been. But yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful in the sense, not just that things weren't as bad as they possibly could have been, for this year, but I'm hopeful in the sense that there is been more of a mass awakening of folks who are feeling that they were lied to, because they were, and cheated for voting for a person who has been revealed, quite frankly, as who he always was just a con
Yes.
man that had no ideas, who wanted to serve the powerful and screw everybody else. And
Yeah.
and so I do look at 2026 as potentially a year for, an expanded awakening, not just an awakening of, Trump is just a symptom of one thing, but an awakening of, we can have a society that truly does work for all of us. We can have a time we can make this present time, a time where there is equity, where there is, a affirmation of, of widespread humanity in the United States, and that we have policies that work for the many and not the few. Uh,
Mhm.
and so maybe it's a pipe dream. I don't know, but I am cautiously optimistic that we're on the cusp of that. So.
I mean, if you can end out this year with any sort of cautious optimism, I feel like you're doing okay. No, it's really true. I've been thinking a lot about the title of that book, Let This Radicalize You, and, like,
Mm,
I think this is a year that radicalized a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people that I didn't think would be as clear-eyed about what's happening, get real clear-eyed about what's happening, and I've seen it percolate into our communities in all these ways. Like, I was at my local bookstore last night, and they had this huge display, like, right by the door, and it was whistles for people protesting ICE and zines about what to do when ICE is in your neighborhood, and it was just totally normalized, and that is, I feel like there's a strange comfort in knowing that people understand that this is where we are and what they have to do.
yeah, yeah. I think that's perfect place to end our year reflection, if you will.
Yeah.
Um,
Marcus, I didn't get to do my 8 ounces of joy.
oh, I thought that was the 8 ounces. My bad.
No,
I'm
I'm
sorry, Nora.
sorry.
I
I mean,
apologize.
no, it's totally fine.
No, go ahead. Nora, what is your 8 ounces of joy this week?
Oh man, I gotta tell you, this was a hard week to find the joy. But I will say, um, the the afternoon sort of, I think it was afternoon or evening that a lot of us started hearing the news about the shooting in
Mm,
Australia.
yeah.
I pretty quickly saw like large numbers of people starting to post on social media pictures of their menorahs, and
Mm,
in particular pictures of their menorahs in their windows, and talking about what it means to shine a light and to
mm,
sort of be bravely the person that you are and the beliefs that you have, and what it means to like reflect that out into the world in times of danger. And it was just like hundreds and hundreds of pictures of these beautiful menorahs and people lighting them. And I don't consider myself particularly Jewish,
mm,
but it brought me so much comfort in that moment. And
mm,
it reminded me that we are a community across the world that thinks that these things are not okay and wants to share the light with other people. And that was just this like lovely little ray of light in the darkness this week.
God, I'm so glad, Nora, that we did not bypass your 8 ounces of joy. That was excellent. I just to dovetail on that though, like yeah, I sat down, on the first night of Hanukkah with my partner and her son and his father. And we it was obviously, in the shadow of that tragedy
Mhm.
in Australia. And we just kind of sat there and just reflected on, what Hanukkah actually meant, and it's, at its core, and it's, to continue to produce and shine light even in the bleakest of times, right?
Yep.
And so to be able to, and again, I'm not the most religious person, right? But I do believe, I think, in the sanctity of ritual and the importance of it.
Yeah.
And so, just as nothing else, but a reminder that there's more than just this frenzy of life, and that we do need to take time to reflect and, um, and to really sort of help in terms of navigating some of this the bizarre nature that life hands us every single day. And so
Mhm.
anyway, it was a good
Yeah.
reminder that, to continue to shine even in this bleakness. So thank you for reminding me again, Nora.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, folks, we have arrived at the end of another week where reality felt less like a timeline and more like a group chat that nobody is moderating at this point in the year. Somehow we're still here. That alone, as we've said, feels like an accomplishment worth acknowledging. And
Here,
if this help
there.
and if this show helps you make sense of the noise or at least feel less alone while everything is very loud, we hope you'll consider supporting us at inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. Think of it less as a donation and more as keeping a tiny lighthouse on during a political storm.
Indeed. And a huge second thank you to Renee Hopkins. I know that this was a re-air, but her words still continue to resonate. And so huge thank you to her for coming on the first time and allowing us to re-air her conversation the second time. And as always, gratitude to our producer, Jessica Parknow, who keeps the ship afloat even as the seas get choppier, and to Aham Aluo for the music that gently convinces us we know what we're doing.
You can catch In the Meanwhile on KVRU Wednesdays at 5 or listen to full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, basically anywhere you go to doom scroll, and occasionally learn something, we hope. New episodes drop every Friday, and until then, we'll see you in the meanwhile.